Okay, the first essential factor for establishing a successful vineyard that we're going to talk about today is site selection. And site selection is the single most critical factor for establishing a successful vineyard. And joining me today to talk about site selection is Dan Limoges of Limoges Cellars in beautiful North Georgia. Hey, Dan, thanks for taking a few minutes to hang out with me on the podcast again.
Happy to be back. Thanks for inviting us, Fritz.
You got it. Yeah, you joined me back on episode 8, along with Christine, sharing your personal experience and advice on starting a vineyard. And I'm thrilled you agreed to come back on the podcast today and talk to the listener about site selection. So let me start by introducing the 4 critical features of a location that influence a successful vineyard site. So in order, I would say they are climate, your soil quality, your water quality, and then your site topography, the smaller features of the site. So let's start with climate. You know, when we talk about climate, we talk about the macroclimate and the mesoclimate. The macroclimate is the overarching climate of a region, you know, how hot it gets, what are the highs and low temperatures throughout the season and off season, the amount of rainfall, and specifically the timing of that rainfall. If it's happening during the season, that's going to present challenges with disease. If there's hurricane rains that come near harvest or monsoon rains, I've worked in regions with those issues. Those are challenges you need to know about before you plant the vineyard because it's going to influence the varieties of grapes you plant. Then I mentioned soil quality. In general, we're looking for a well-drained soil. We want at least 18 inches of good topsoil before we hit some bedrock or something below that's not really going to be, let's say, nutritious for grapes or penetrable by roots. And we also want to look at the pH of the soil, the texture, the structure for how roots are going to move in that soil, its water holding capacity, and ultimately the nutrient availability and uptake. But really drainage is a big thing because grapes don't like wet feet. And then water quality. If you're irrigating your vineyard, I know, Dan, that you are not irrigating. You're mostly getting seasonal rain, but in a vineyard that needs to irrigate, you're going to be putting on water during the growing season, and you'll need at least 5 to 10 gallons per minute per acre of water output to keep a vineyard going. So you need to have not only quantity water, you need not only to have a good quantity of water, but you need good quality of water. So not toxic with salts, boron, or excess minerals. Really important. And then finally, the site topography. That means the hills, the slopes, the aspect that the slope faces. Is it north facing, south facing? Is there good air and water drainage? Slope will help with water and air drainage. And what is the proximity to other properties? Are there neighbors nearby that are not going to like your vineyard? Is there a farm nearby where herbicide could drift in and cause problems with your grapes? There's a lot of things we need to consider. You're a relatively new grower. Your first planting was in 2021. So I want to talk about your experiences with site selection. I know the listener is curious to know what your experiences were. So I know you looked at several sites that you ultimately turned down before picking your current vineyard site in North Georgia. And I just am curious, what were some of the reasons you turned down those other sites and picked the place where you ultimately planted your vines? Because they're doing great.
Well, thank you, Fritz. It's all with your help. Well, you know what? And it all really relates to all of those items you described. And I would first start by saying that everything we were looking for, we learned what was critical for Georgia. I know you have a nationwide audience, so each growing region is going to probably, the list of critical items is going to be a little different. But for us, in our search, we were looking for higher elevation. We were looking for those slopes for wind and water drainage. We were looking for the proper soil and water, as you mentioned. And then when you talk about proximity, we also looked at it from the business point of view. Is we're looking at proximity to other vineyards, because usually when people go out to the vineyards, they don't just go to one vineyard, they go to 3 or 4 in a day. And so it helps if you're, each vineyard complements each other. So it helps if they can have a short distance to travel. Then additionally, we looked at proximity to our target audience or our market base, which for us is the Atlanta area. And why we knew North Georgia was where we wanted to be. Then when we're looking at some of the different properties, Christina and I searched for about 3 years all over North Georgia. We saw some properties where, as you mentioned, we were too close to neighbors. So one property, the neighbor had a large poultry farm, which we knew at some point when the wind's blowing the wrong direction, we're going to get a big whiff of poultry farm. And I felt that would not be good for our guests.
Right. Yeah.
We had another site, which we were very close on in a nearby county, that the neighbor did not want to live next to a vineyard, and he threatened us in the county with a lawsuit. So that's something to
Oh
be
boy.
mindful of.
So I'm kind of curious now to know, what were some of the mitigation tactics you had to do to prepare your site for planting? I mean, trees were a big barrier. So
Yep.
what did that entail? What were some of the challenges you had to overcome to make growing grapes successful?
Right. So as we just talked, the trees were the first hurdle we had to get through. Well, before that, we had to get roads into the property, and that meant crossing a stream so that we could get to that forest to start taking down trees. But then, as we took down the trees, we did all of the things you mentioned previously: the water testing, the soil testing, and we found that we were looking for a couple things. We wanted to know what nutrients were available in the soil. Mostly, we wanted to know what the pH was. And we wanted to be sure we weren't going to hit bedrock too close to the surface. When you're in those higher elevations, it's not totally uncommon here in North Georgia to hit large slabs of rock. So then what we found is our pH, our soil was just very acidic. So I think we were around 4.5 on our first planting, and we knew we needed to get between 6 and 6.5. And so that meant bringing a lot of dolomitic lime in, which fortunately we have a good company down the road that sells and spreads for us. And all I had to do was work it into the soil.